Now, the United States is set to announce an arms embargo against South Sudan. It's part of efforts to increase the pressure on President Salva Kiir to end the civil war. The move would signal that President Trump's administration has lost patience with the country's warring parties after several ceasefires have been violated. Back in December 2016, under President Barack Obama, the U.S. unsuccessfully attempted to convince the UN to back an arms embargo against South Sudan. Currently, most weapons enter the country from nations in Eastern Europe. In addition to the arms embargo, the U.S. has sanctioned senior officials close to President Kiir. To get more insight on this, we're joined by CGTN's Daniel Branches in Washington. Daniel, has the arms embargo against South Sudan been officially announced, and what exactly prompted this decision?
Yes, it has. In the last couple of hours, the U.S. State Department has released a very strongly worded statement demonstrating its commitment to a comprehensive arms embargo, which in reality is largely symbolic because, as you were saying, most of the weapons sourced are from other countries, if not all. Any companies that also operate in the United States that may be involved in supplying weapons to South Sudan would be included, but that is highly unlikely to be the case. So the timing of this, hard to speculate. We know that the U.S. State Department has been focusing recently on improving its Africa policy. It's been much more focused. We've had a statement on Kenya in the last 24 hours. So I think it reflects a determination by the US State Department to do more, to try to leverage more influence going forward. And also next week, of course, we have peace talks. So that may be another reason why the State Department has now come up with this arms embargo.
And how effective do you think the embargo will be in pushing for a peaceful resolution to the conflict in South Sudan?
I think this sends a message. It is not going to be in itself effective, but it sends a message that the United States is very serious about applying pressure on the parties and indeed the region. So at the moment, I think some of the leverage is fairly limited, but the US does have the capability to inflict much more harm if it chose to do so on the financial networks of the leadership in South Sudan and regionally the sort of financial ties that they have. So there is definitely more leverage that the United States holds. The question is, does it have the political commitment to maintain that pressure and, if necessary, apply much more stringent financial sanctions on the warring parties?
And Daniel, is it likely a US embargo could be followed by similar sanctions by the UN?
From what we've seen in terms of the politics of this, that is highly unlikely, especially given the current tensions between the United States and Russia, which holds a permanent seat on the UN Security Council. Another question to ask is whether these sanctions and other actions might be backed up by the African Union and IGAD, though both of those organizations have expressed an interest in having sanctions. The Enough Project here in Washington, which is highly involved in trying to advise US policy, says the African Union has previously threatened 13 times, IGAD about 7 times to impose sanctions since the start of this civil war. Under no occasion has either of those parties actually followed through. And if the US wants to use its leverage, if the US wants to be consistently involved in this, given all of the interest that it has, both in terms of strategy and in terms of the humanitarian picture, the disastrous humanitarian picture for everybody involved, then we might see a change in US policy where the State Department and indeed the White House begins to ramp up pressure. But that is still an open question.
All right, Daniel Wrench is live for us in Washington. Thank you, Daniel.